Hello, fellow followers. Welcome back to FanZcene. I am Greg of FanZcene, and with me today is the illustrious director David Weiner of the In Search of Darkness movies. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. Happy to be back, Greg. Nice to see you.
I'm always glad to have you here because, was telling you earlier, any day to talk horror movies with you is a good day. Is a good day, and yes. So now we're on to the 90s from the In Search of Darkness. We moved on from the 80s. Now we're to the 90s. What's some of the stuff you got planned on this to make it a little more different? I guess I want to say maybe.
Yeah, well, the first thing that we're doing, listen, please indulge me. I always like for that one fan who's new, who has no idea what In Search of Darkness is. In Search of Darkness is a series of long form documentaries that I write and direct for Creator VC. And we did the 80s. We did a trilogy of 80s movies, and they all go from 1980 to 1989. In each year, we cover a number of films, and we have a number of the people who are either in front of the camera or behind the camera talking all about it. And then in between, we have larger context chapters, topic chapters, talking about all sorts of stuff from the era. What's different about the 90s is this time we're dividing the whole rigmarole into two parts, two giant chunks. We're trying something a little different. That's why it's 1990 to 1994. And then as expected about a year from now, ideally you and I will be talking about 95 to 99.
Yes.
That's the plan. And so what's different is we're sort of dividing it up, but the idea was sort of to make it more manageable, but also to fit, rather than like we've done in the past where we do part one, it did well, so let's do part two. All the movies that we can't fit in, all the topics that we can't fit in, we just kind of go back to one and do it again. And then if there's demand, we go back to one and we do it again. Kind of thought maybe this time around we can get more bang for our buck and put more material and discussion and movies in and fit in some television as well as film, because there's so much to talk about in the 90s. And so that's kind of the big difference, really. And lastly, I'll just say about that is, I thought, well, we'll do maybe like a 3-hour movie. And then as I got started, I was like, there's so much amazing stuff. There's no way that I could cheap out not only on everybody who loves these movies, but myself as well. I'm just like, no, there's way too much to cover. You can never cover it all. But at least if I do another mega huge long form documentary, which is this time is the longest we've done so far. And with credits, it's going to be almost 6 hours long.
Wow. That's exciting. That's actually exciting. And for anybody who's interested, if that piqued in your interest at all, there will be a link in the description down below so you can go order the documentary and everything. And I have lots of videos here on my channel where I've reviewed all the documentaries and everything, so check that out. But that's 6 hours.
You could see the metrics of the fans go, yay, and then the other people are like, bye.
I'm all for it. When I watch them, honestly, when I watch them, it's just like they breeze by. Like I could just sit there and I'll start watching. Like the last one was like 4.5 hours or was it 5?
In Search of Darkness 3 was the longest In Search of Darkness, and it was about 5 hours and 5 minutes. Sorry, 5 hours and 15 minutes plus credits run long, because we like to include as many people talking about their love for horror as possible. So it's almost like a 5 hour and 45 minute movie.
I gotta say that was one of my favorite things. Like when I saw myself in the credits, I don't know if you saw my review. I sort of like teared up a little bit because it's like I'm in this movie with all these people, and it's just like it was amazing. It was an amazing moment. But no, I watched that I think on a Sunday. And I just sat down and popped it, and by the time I was done, I didn't even realize it was like 5 hours. I was just like I was having a blast.
Well, I think for the one person in the far corner who isn't familiar with these films, what's cool about it is that the movie segments are all anywhere between 2, 3, 5 minutes long, but then you move on to the next. And the chapters, are in between the years are 8, 9, 10 minutes, but then you're on to the next. So it's very easy to watch it in multiple sittings. You could start and stop whenever you want. Like you could watch a year and a chapter and then be done for the night and spread it out over time. Or, but the thing is, the way we do this, it's edited so well, that if I do say so myself, that it just flies. It really sort of draws you in, and you keep on saying, one more, one more. Next thing you know, 5 hours have gone by.
Or you're just sitting there going, I wonder if they're going to cover one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I got to see it. Maybe it's in the next one. Maybe it's in the next one. And you keep going, and it keeps pulling you in, and you find movies you've never seen before, and which is something I'm excited for in the 90s because, yeah, I'm a horror fan. I probably know a lot of the movies, but I also probably know not a lot of the movies in that. And that's one of the great things about these documentaries is it helps you find those horror movies that you never knew existed or just for whatever reason escaped you. So in your research from 90 to 94, what are some of the movies that just like took you by surprise that maybe people will not have heard of or something?
Well, what I like to do is it's funny, I was thinking back, I started my professional career in the 90s. I'm that old. And so, I worked in the film industry and I have worked in the entertainment industry ever since. And so I felt it was my duty to see as much as I could because I was working in movies, and especially I was working in a lot of genre films as well. And so, because I worked for like Full Moon Entertainment back in the day, and
I love Full Moon. I know people.
I whenever I get together with Charlie Band, if I remind him of that, he's just like, he gets this look of terror, like, uh-oh, he knows where the bodies are buried. But like, to answer your question, ultimately, I felt I needed to watch everything, and that's not only in the cineplexes and on the big screen, but also so much straight to video stuff. Mm-hmm. But 30 years on, when I was like, when Robin Block of Creator VC, executive producer, is like, all right, let's do the 90s next because there's such a demand for it by our audience. I just thought to myself, okay, let me do a little revisiting, because you get this. There's definitely the Silence of the Lambs or Army of Darkness or Dead Alive or Tremors or Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now I'll stop before I become a giant listicle. But there are certain movies that I am always returning to, no matter what time of year or how many years go by. They're really kind of mainstays for me. But there's also other films where I was just like, oh my God, really? I've totally forgot about that. I forgot, I got to get a list in front of me now because my mind goes blank. But everything from the Subspecies, the Full Moon and the Subspecies franchise, and Puppet Master, to movies like Delicatessen, to Mick Garris and Sleepwalkers, to fun films that I really enjoyed at the time when I was in the theater, like Pet Sematary 2, or John Landis's Innocent Blood. You have Candyman that appeared on the scene, but side by side with Candyman, you got movies like Hellraiser 3, Child's Play 2, 3, and upwards in that decade. Again, short of being a listicle, I looked at all these movies and I thought, what about Pennywise? Pennywise on TV, and up until now I haven't been doing television. I've been making allusions to television or a reference, but I didn't actually do segments on television just because there's so much film to conquer, and still not enough time to do it. But I kind of thought it would be an absolute crime not to cover it effectively.
Oh, definitely.
Reached out to Tommy Lee Wallace, director of it and writer of the second episode. And he sat down with me and we talked all about, the casting coup of getting Tim Curry, some of the other people that they considered until Tim Curry became just the obvious choice. It's very, very cool talking about all this stuff, and I'll just stop here.
Well, that kind of interests me because I think about this, and we've talked about the 80s and everything. Like, horror was huge in the 80s. It was big in the theaters and everything. And in the 90s, like you said, it went through like a growing pains, and maybe horror's always been successful no matter what people like to think, but it maybe wasn't in the theaters as much. And so like you say, a lot of it moved on to TV, and a lot of it moved on to straight to a home video because the home video market was huge at that time. And I think about that, and I think about movies like Night of the Demons Part Two, which some
Hmm.
people will say is better than the first movie.
Hmm.
And it was a straight to VHS movie, and it is an incredible movie, And I think about that, and then like you mentioned it, and then of course Tales from the Crypt, and then you had so much other stuff. It just like moved in a different direction, and the dentist movies. I love the
Hmm.
dentist. So like there was like this weird brand of horror
Not to
that
be
just
confused with Dr. Giggles, but they're kind of on
yes,
par,
yeah.
at least in perception,
I
right?
always like when people find out that they were both on LA Law.
Right, right.
Yeah, Larry Drake.
That's the real horror movie right there, right?
I know who was I can't remember who it was, maybe it was John Fallon I was just talking to, but I was like, forget Freddy versus Jason. I want to see the dentist versus Dr. Giggles.
Right? That would have been awesome.
I mean, Freddy vs. Jason was awesome too, but still, I mean, that would have been something good. That would have been cool. But no, you're right. It's like the horror was at a different point, and I think a lot of the creative energy went into like TV and straight to video movies, and they were, regardless of what people think, some of them were just as good, if not better, than theatrical movies.
I think when you like to say, and justifiably so, regardless of what people think, I find oftentimes we as horror fans are always on the defensive, even sometimes from other horror fans who
Mm-hmm.
like to gatekeep what's good and what's not. What makes me happy to do installment after installment after installment of In Search of Darkness is everything's on an even playing field. And we don't judge saying one is better than the other. We talk about the triumphs and the challenges of every single film, and how it did at the box office sometimes, and how some of, like, Night of the Demons 2 and Night of the Demons especially, it didn't really find an audience until later. We have Amelia Kincaid talking all about being Angela in these movies. She had no idea. She was shocked that they asked her to come back, and she was the only character to come back for the
Yeah,
sequel. I mean, it makes sense because she's a demon and so on.
yeah,
But there's the audience for these movies. It doesn't really matter whether you think this movie is good or bad. The audience for this movie loves these for what they are, and
yes,
horror fans love to circle the wagons over their special films that mean something to them because of that one day that they went to the video store with their cousin. They discovered that one film. They watched it in the basement so the parents wouldn't find out they were watching it. And to this day, that reminds you of not only the film, but a special time. Or
yes,
even how bad the film was, but you laughed until you couldn't stop laughing.
yeah.
And it's just happy memories. And so much of the nostalgia is based on the fact that we all had such great times watching these films, and they meant so much to us. And now the time capsule has moved to the 90s, 30 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And last I'll say about that is that the 80s really, really are a hard decade to compete with because there was so much great stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
the 90s had a huge amount of really great stuff, as you said, whether it was on television, whether it was straight to video, or in the theaters, whether it was designated horror or thriller, is a discussion that we have in one of the chapters in Search of Darkness 1994. There's so much to chew on, and it's good stuff.
It is. It is. That's why I love your guys' documentaries, because there truly is so much to talk about. And you're right. There is something where like some people say, "Oh, that movie sucks," and you're like, "Well, I watched it when I was like this, and I love it, and it means something to you in here, no matter what people say." I just had that conversation with the guy that played Leslie Vernon. If you've seen that
Mhm.
movie, he was talking about how he's happy that movie maybe isn't as well known as people would like it to be, because there's something special about having a movie like that in your back pocket where you're like, oh, you've never seen this. Let me
Right, right,
show it.
right.
Let me show it to you. So that's sort of like what you guys are doing with these documentaries.
Also, when you meet these folks at a convention or stuff like that, they all, they get all the time the big, the top title that they're known for. So when you reach into their IMDb resume and you just say, "Oh, I love this deep cut," and you drop that name, that it gets their attention. They're like, "Oh, you've seen that? Oh, you
Yeah.
like that? Really?"
Yeah.
Jill Sholin is in our film, and she's the star of Popcorn, and she did a bunch of other horror films as well. But she didn't even realize people cared about Popcorn until many years later, when people were coming to her at conventions saying, "This means something to me,
Yeah.
and it's special because." And at first, she's like, "Really?"
Yeah.
But she's come to recognize that it's sort of the gift that keeps on giving so many years later, because people even discover it later. They didn't even have to discover it when it came out, because it didn't make the impact that she hoped it would. I mean, it came out literally like a week or two before Silence of the Lambs, and got all
Yeah.
sorts of advertising, but got overshadowed by Silence.
It happens, but they, like you said, they find their life. They find their fan base, and then they do mean something to somebody, and that's incredible. That is incredible to hear. But with this one, what are some of the movies that maybe took you by surprise as you were, like, much like Jill, or the popcorn surprise? Or what's something that maybe took you by surprise when you were talking about them or researching them, or something that you're like,
Uh,
oh, the fan base of this.
I'm all sorts of I don't. I want to keep
Without
some.
spoiling.
Well, yeah, yeah. Well, I want to spoil. That's my problem. Yeah. But one that comes to mind is Necromantic 2.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Well, see, that's I can tell by your response right there. I just kind of thought, how cool would it be to talk to Jörg Buttgereit, the German filmmaker
Mhm.
who did Necromantic. He did Necromantic 2. He's done a bunch of other films. He did a serial killer point of view from the serial killer film called Schramm. But this amazing German filmmaker. And I kind of thought, how cool would it be to talk with him? But is this something that kind of crosses the line? It's a movie about necrophilia. Is how
Yeah.
palatable is this really?
Right.
And he's a real wonderful, straightforward, friendly guy who explains and justifies and just gives a good behind the scenes explanation as to why he made the films he made, for what purpose, how they were received, the trouble that he got into. He was almost thrown in jail. He could have
Yeah.
gone to jail for making Necromantic 2, and he's just like, why didn't they do that for Necromantic 1? I guess it wasn't big enough at the time. Why did people want a Necromantic 2? It was kind of a one-off film. So I find it's very, that was surprising to me, because while necrophilia is not my jam, a film about necrophilia that can be explained by the filmmaker in a very logical and rational way, making you that much more interested in seeking out that film and seeing for yourself, is something that makes me real proud to be able to do and include. So we went to Berlin, Germany, and sat down with Jorg, and super cool guy, and proud to have his stuff and his point of view, not only for those films but other films as well. When I talk about other films, I won't list what he talks about,
Right.
but there was a whole serial killer subgenre that really exploded in the 90s,
Mhm.
especially in the wake of Silence of the Lambs, but also because of the obsession of like real life serial killers, whether it was Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, who really creeped us all out because of the real things that were happening
Yeah.
in the early 90s. So the 90s, a lot of the movies were reflecting present day, the current climate, and our genuine fears that the person next door might be a wolf in sheep's clothing. You don't know who they were. They could be a serial killer. You never know.
Yeah.
Or they could be Annie Wilkes. You never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Mr. Man. That is going to be an interesting segment when you talk about necromantic. That's going to blow a lot of people. Like I said, I know about them, but I don't know how many other people know about them. So that's going to blow people's minds, I think. But you're right. That's some of my favorite. I love that, like the Roger Corman stripper serial killer movies from the 90s, because those were always fun, and it was always the same story. Is like either she was a news reporter or she was a police officer. She went undercover as a stripper because there's somebody killing strippers.
Angel. right?
Yes,
Let's
Angel. Angel. Yes, Angel is a great
say
example of that. Yes.
student by day, Hollywood hooker by
But
night,
yeah, and
right?
great like cast with the cowboy. I can't remember his name, but he's a great cowboy actor. He's in tons of movies and stuff. But like that's like a weird little L.A.
Subgenre. It's like a
subgenre there.
subgenre. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's another conversation that we have about this is what is a thriller and what is a like a psychological thriller or erotic thriller? If there's a body count, at what point does it become horror? What defines horror if they want to call it a thriller? Is it just a label? Is there more to it than that? And it's very cool to have people like Alex Winter and Heather Langenkamp and other folks talking, Jill Sholin talking about this topic, Brian Yuzna, just talking about this topic and what defines all this stuff. John Carpenter talks about it. It's very fun getting all these people known for their projects just to talk about a topic, whether it's the thriller versus horror debate or discussion, or talking about CG, during that time
Oh
and the
yeah.
advantage of CG, you know.
It is because like people go back and forth on slasher movies. Is that a horror form of horror? Is a serial killer sort of like a slasher movie? You could go back and forth on that all day long. But like the CG, what's the name of that movie with Edward Furlong? I think
Oh,
it's Brain
yeah,
Scan, right? That and Lawnmower Man, like CGI. But those are still so fun to watch, even regardless. I mean, there's like you said, there's something about them.
They're fun. They're definitely fun. I think one of the reasons why the '90s are kind of oft maligned by people, dismissed by people, we're kind of calling it a bit of a lost decade.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not lost to the super fans, but a lot of people you talk to the casual person and they're like, well, let's see. What happened in the '90s? Gosh, the Scream, Silence of the Lambs, and then they just go blank. They don't know. Or on the flip side, they say, oh, yeah, there was nothing good that came out of that because there was all this bad CGI. But what you have to do is you have to reframe your context as to this was a brand new technology, a burgeoning technology that was blowing people's minds when they first saw it. So you're watching Mick Garris's Sleepwalkers, and you're watching the cat creature going through all his faces. That's right around the same time that Michael Jackson's Black or White video showed everyone what morphine could do. James Cameron's T2 was showing what morphine could do. And of course, 92 and then 93, you've got a little movie called Jurassic Park, where everyone said, I want to do something like that. And then you get this explosion of CGI. And sometimes it was really good. But more often than not, the producers didn't understand that you can't pull off Spielberg Jurassic Park effects without knowing that a larger portion of it was actually practical effects and hiding that fine line with the digital effects and having the money and the time and ILM to do it right. If you're not reaching deep into your pockets, of course the result is not going to have much longevity. That's all I'll say about that. But it's all about context, right?
Right. I agree. I mean, but there's just so something special about them. Like you said, it was like a new burgeoning thing, and it's just something that catches your attention with them. And of course, they didn't know how to use it, like Spielberg and all of them. But hey,
they just said, I want that for like 1/5 of the price, and now we dismiss it. But if you and another sort of analogy I like to use is Ray Harryhausen and stop motion. Willis O'Brien, King Kong. I grew up loving Ray Harryhausen, Sinbad movies and the like. And I got to tell you, that does not hold up. Of course it doesn't. But I think what people treat it a little differently. They say, well, that's a time capsule. It's a piece of a time, a bygone era when that was the best it was. And so we accept that and its limitations based on the fact that it came way before the '90s, or the '80s, the last Ray Harryhausen was Clash of the Titans in what,
Mhm.
82? So, or was it 81, 82? But either way, it was basically a, uh, an approach to visual effects that blew people's minds when they first saw that, and they can completely suspend their disbelief. You know, well,
Mhm.
why can't people do that for the 90s? Maybe they can someday. Maybe with the help of this documentary, it'll help them
Yeah.
reframe their point of view,
I'm
perhaps.
I hope it does because yeah, I love the '80s movies. That's my favorite decade of horror. '70s is great too because '70s got some great stuff, but there is so much lost in the '90s that I don't think people gave a lot of chance to. And I some of my favorites are the straight to video because like that's the boom of the video store, right? That we talk about that a lot is like that's when you would go in there and you'd see them all on the shelf, and that's just I love that. And but I think I ask you this every time you're on here, but with this one, what's the one movie or a movie you were super excited to talk about? That's you personally, you as a fan.
Oh yeah, and then I always go,
Yeah.
because it's so hard to choose. Um, uh, I'm gonna think about that. I think it was cool. Uh, Alex Winter has been a friend to our documentaries. He's been wonderful, and so he was in the first In Search of Darkness. He was in Search of Tomorrow, talking about Bill and Ted and sci-fi.
Mhm.
He was kind enough to return to talk about his work in the 90s. Now, of course, what is his work in the 90s that's not Bill and Ted, right? You know,
I
Bill
know.
Bogus Journey.
I love that movie. The one,
Well,
Freak.
Freaked, right?
Freak.
Freaked. Freaked is a Freaked a horror movie? Not really. It's got horror elements, but it's a fantastic, phantasmagoric, outrageous, ridiculous, gross out, hysterical, just
I
it
love
has to be seen to believe.
it. It's
Seen to
so
be
good.
believed. And I remember when I was talking with Alex, uh, you know, previous to doing the 90s, I wasn't quite sure if we were ever going to get to the 90s. And so I remember thinking to myself, boy, it sure is a crime that we're not talking all about Freaked. Freaked came up a couple times. I mean, I remember we were talking about Screaming Mad George and the effects and Bill Corso and things like that. But ultimately, it wasn't something, I was like, please, please, Alex, come back and talk all
Yeah.
about Freaked, and your perspective of what it was like making movies and the film industry in the 90s and the horror industry and the genre
Hmm.
industry. And he has wonderful, wonderful tales that are hysterical about the making, whether it was the insane makeup that at a certain point, he just, because he was co-directing it as well
Hmm.
as acting in it, and he basically didn't take off his makeup at the end of the day. He's just like, I'm losing all this time acting and directing and just managing this film. Something's got to give, and I'm not getting enough sleep. I know. I'll just, wear my half insane, giant eared, pus filled makeup, and I'll just go to sleep with that every day until it just rots and falls off. And he did that, and it was pretty ridiculous. And he talks about things like, you know, Keanu Reeves. I don't know if people even know Keanu Reeves is in Freaked because he's not credited, and he's
Right.
completely in makeup as the dog boy.
Hmm.
And it's just the dog milkman, to be specific about it. It's hysterical and it's ridiculous. And that was a real treat to be able to get him to talk so enthusiastically about that, and because he loves when people ask him about Freaked, because he gets Bill and Ted all day long. And I think he's really proud of Freaked, and it didn't quite get the release that they had hoped for. So the fact that it still resonates to this day, I think, is something that it's rewarding for him.
It is. I love that movie. That was speaking of video store. I rented that from the video store because hey, it's like, oh, it's Bill and Ted, the guy from Bill and Ted. That's why I rented it, and I love that movie. I mean, the cast alone is just Mr. T and the Rastafarian eyes.
She's the bearded lady, exactly. And oh
Randy
yeah,
Quaid is insane as always. It's a great. I
yeah.
wish you would ask me if we'll ever get a new Blu-ray of that because that thing has been so out of print for so
Mm,
long. It's so hard to get. It is so hard to get a copy of that. I would love to have like a big, one of those big sets they've been doing lately with all these new movies. I mean, it deserves
sure,
it.
I'm sure
And
he'd
they,
love to do that too.
yeah,
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
deserves the bells and whistles.
usually those things are tied up with
Yeah.
studio rights for with people who do not understand uh,
Hmm.
the actual value of what they have in their hands. But who knows?
That's the sad thing. Maybe one day. But no, that's cool because I love Freaked, and that'd be. I mean, you're right. How would you? That is sort of a horror element type movie because it's got all the practical effects. It's mad scientist guy kidnaps this old TV star, a kid TV star, and turns him into a freak for his freak shows.
Yeah,
But
you
it's
know,
also,
yeah, it creates all these freaks. I mean, there are people's heads ripped off. I mean, there's plenty. It's all cartoonish and it's all comic bookish, but it's also ridiculous. But it's a visual feast, and that's one that uses multiple type of effects. There's stop motion effects. In fact, there's a quick Harryhausen moment in there where you see, if you look closely, if ever you miss it, there's the Cyclops from Seventh Voyage of Sinbad makes a quick appearance
yeah.
in that film, as a claymation moment. And yeah, you just gotta please seek that one out. It's a good one.
I highly recommend it. All right. Well, we've been going here for about 30 minutes. I appreciate your time and talking to me as always about the In Search of Darkness franchise.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
I'm,
great.
I'm going to totally interrupt you. I mean, if you have one last key question about whatever and whatnot, please ask.
Okay, let's see. You mentioned Tremors earlier because Tremors is like an old school monster type movie. So, alongside Tremors, did you focus on any other that went along with that? And what I mean, Michael Gross, what was that like talking with him?
Oh, Michael Gross is the best. He is more than happy to extol the virtues of the Tremors franchise because he definitely. Here's a guy who was the dad on sitcom television on Family Ties for years, and the day after that wraps, he goes straight to Lone Pine, California, to play Burt Gummer, which is basically a survivalist, and. He loves that character. He loves Burt Gummer, and he thought working on that film was a special. Sometimes, we being people who work on movie sets, sometimes it's a great experience. Sometimes it's an awful experience. Sometimes it's somewhere in between, and it's just the work needs to be done, and you get a film out of it. But there are these occasional special experiences where everyone is just a joy to work with. And so, from Ron Underwood to everyone down, director Ron Underwood, the director of Tremors, Michael Gross, his working with Reba McEntire and Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward, everything was just an absolute joy for him. He loved it. And the fact that he kept on not only continuing to do sequels, but to become the face of Tremors is something that he never quite expected. And so it's very cool talking with Michael Gross about Tremors and his love for Tremors. The sequels 2 and 3 and higher all came out in the second half of the 90s and then after that.
Yeah.
So there's something to look forward to with part 2. But we do talk about Tremors, and I really enjoyed his perspective on some other films and his point of view as looking at it from an acting standpoint and getting into the mindset of some of these characters and themes and concepts. He adds a lot of value to the other films that he talks about. It's really nice.
That's cool. That's cool. I like listening to him talk Tremors. I love Tremors. Once again, another movie that came out, didn't do well, but it found its audience through years. It's an amazing movie. And when
he's also a model train enthusiast. I don't know if you know that. Yeah,
no,
he's really
I knew that one. That's cool. That's cool.
That's neither here nor there, but it's definitely not a documentary.
Well, I appreciate you, David. Thank you for your time and talking with me. I do hope when you get to the second half, you talk about the movie Bats with Lou Diamond Phillips.
Oh, okay.
Because
put in your dibs now.
I want Bats because that's a movie that does not get talked about a lot, and it's very Tremors-esque.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very Tremors-esque, and I think Lou Diamond Phillips does amazing in that movie. But right. Yeah, if next whatever you guys send out with the next thing, like list of movies or whatever, I'm putting Bats on there. So
very cool. Very cool.
Yes. So I appreciate you and thank you. And as always, everybody, there will be a link in the description down below so you can go and order you a copy of In Search of Darkness, 1990 to 94.
go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90shorrordoc.com until Halloween night. You have a limited time to pre-order it, get your name in the credits alongside Michael Gross, Alex Winter, John Carpenter, all your heroes. There's some new names as well, contemporary names, Mike Flanagan, Kayla Cooper, the writer of Megan and Malignant, and so on. It's very, 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 very cool. And again, as always, Greg, I do appreciate you taking the time for us, for me, and for Creator VC, and showing your support, because you are clearly a genuine, you're the genuine article as a horror fan goes.
Thank you. I mean, everybody likes what they like, right? I have, people like this, people like that. I don't care, man. It's your bag. You like it. I like horror. Let's just talk. That's right. That's all it is. It's fun time. And I mean, and that's why I like talking to you guys. And that's why I like supporting you guys, because you guys give out amazing documentaries for the horror community and people that's just interested in movies. And it goes through so many different movies of so many, just so many different, covers so many grounds of diversity and everything of movies. So I'm happy. So I appreciate it, David. Thank you.
Can't wait for you to see it. Can't wait for you to see it.
I can't wait to see it as well. But make sure you guys go get it. 90shorror.com. I said it right? 90shorror.com.
90shorrordoc.com.
The 90shorrordoc.com. And make sure you guys hit the like button, subscribe, share out the video and everything. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.